TIFU by teaching my daughter to say please by user specialist op 6478. Today I hit a milestone I have been mentally hiking towards for about 6 months. I have a daughter 3 who is selective mute or nonverbal, currently awaiting a full assessment, and I've started speech training her. I didn't know the first thing about it until I had to, but I've thrown myself into it. It is worth every moment, but can be quite fruitless a lot of the time, so I have been celebrating every small win, waving hello when I say it, pronouncing half a word when prompted, or making an animal noise kind of thing while hoping for a breakthrough moment. This afternoon during learning time I sat her at her little desk and gave her some number blocks. We stacked them and say the numbers. She wanted me to put one on, and tried to grab my hand. I held back and routinely said say please before going to do what she asked. Out of nowhere peeped a little plies clearly as day and music to my ears. I was so surprised I just stared at her and asked her to say it again. She did. Hugh celebrating and dancing and spending the next half an hour back and forth with her, passing me blocks and saying please every time. I was in my element. At dinner time, she said please when she wanted me to pass her the juice. She said please at bath time when she wanted the towel to wipe her eye. What could be better? There was no downside. Until bedtime. She can be a fickle one. Most nights she goes to bed really well, but if she decides to fight the sleep, we can be in for an hour or two of dramatics before she finally passes out like a drunk. Tonight, however, she was armed with a new arrow in her bow. I have just had to explain to the 2 different concerned neighbors who knocked on my door together that while there is a child in my home screaming please, 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 no, no, please, like they were being murdered, it will stop soon. It is in fact just bedtime, and actually a positive thing because we learned a new word. Yeah. This parenting thing is wild. TLDR, I taught my daughter to say please today. At bedtime she threw a tantrum and started screaming it like she was a child about to be fed to a bear, causing both of my nearest neighbors to come knock and check I wasn't committing a crime. Edit, I never in my wildest dreams expected so many people to interact and share similar experiences. Thank you all so much. It has been really nice to read your comments of support, and I appreciate every bit of advice. I am telling my daughter she has read it, famous haha. TIFU, I set myself on fire accidentally and had to be careful. I did to the hospital for emergency surgery, but I used a supercharge for 120. I was doing yard work and had a huge burn pile after it. I usually use diesel as an accelerant for my brush piles, but I was out of diesel and figured if I was careful it would be fine to just use regular gasoline. I poured about 1/4 gallon on there and grabbed a little dab torch. Here's where things went awry. I got a small bit set on fire and turned around to move away. That's when the boom happened. I was basically engulfed in flame. My legs got the worst of it, but my entire right side is burned all the way to my head. I stopped, dropped, and rolled. Skin was falling off my calf muscles as I stood up. Ambulance took me to the helipad and took me to Medical City Plana burn unit. I have these special things stapled into my legs now and we are about to do 6 skin grafts. TLDR, I set myself on fire and my legs are fucked now. Edit, this blew up more than I expected. I am on a lot of heavy painkillers and weed gummies and replying to so many well wishes is just not possible. Thank you all for your thoughts. My family is going to be setting up a GoFundMe in a couple of days to try to help me get through all this. I am obviously not able to work for a while. Would it be kosher to post the link here when they get all that set up? TIFU by tooting so loud my aim post heard by user affectionate badger teen 27. I'm staying out of town and the place I'm staying in hasn't got the greatest sound insulation and there is someone else directly through the wall. I can hear them watching TV. I could even hear them using an app I use because I recognize the notification sounds. Today I've had a little bit of an upset stomach from eating food I'm not used to, which, well, makes me a bit gassy. I've been trying to sneak out quiet toots blow-offs, passing wind, letting one rip you get it because I was pretty sure my neighbor would hear any out loud once. I felt a good one brewing and tried to let it out without trumpeting its presence. Unfortunately, I failed. It was so loud and long it would have made a pattern on one of those cymatic sound resonance plates. There was a short pause and then, coming from the other side of the wall, I heard what sounded like a very intentional loon toot with a wee extra toot at the end. I'm dying. I have attached kid up, embarrassing myself by tooting so loudly my neighbor definitely heard. What am I going to do when I eventually get to meet them? I didn't expect a sympathy toot. Or maybe it was a challenge? Should I do one back? TLDR, I announced my upset tummy to my impost by tooting so loud they heard me through the wall. But at least they did toot back. TIFU by laughing at my girlfriend's parents after trying to explain how Wi-Fi works by user willing tank 3132. So this happened a couple nights ago during dinner with my girlfriend and her parents. Things were going fine until their internet went out briefly. Her dad started saying, with absolute confidence, that the Wi-Fi was probably running out because too many people in the building were using theirs at the same time. I thought he was joking. I chuckled and said, "Oh no, that's not how Wi-Fi works." He didn't laugh. In fact, he looked at me like I had just insulted him. So I tried to clarify. I explained that each household has its own router, its own bandwidth, and that while network congestion exists, it is not because Wi-Fi is a shared neighborhood pool of signal that runs out like hot water. Then his wife jumps in and says something like, well, if our phones are near the neighbor's walls, maybe it interferes and weakens our Wi-Fi. That's why I always keep mine in the center of the house. At this point, I was genuinely confused and tried to keep it light, like, oh okay, I see what you're saying, but I promise that it's not quite how it works. I even offered to help optimize their router placement later. But they both kept arguing with full confidence, and after the 5th time her dad said Wi-Fi can run out if the building is too full, I lost it. I let out a laugh. Not a polite chuckle, a genuine, caught off guard, snorty exhale kind of laugh. It was bad. Her mom stopped mid-sentence. Her dad stared at me like I'd insulted his entire bloodline. My girlfriend gave me a subtle death glare across the table. I immediately apologized and tried to backtrack, but the damage was done. The rest of dinner was painfully quiet. On the drive home, she told me I made them feel stupid and that I should just let it go. Now I am debating whether to show up with flowers or a Wi-Fi explainer chart. So yeah, TIFU by trying to correct a harmless tech misconception and accidentally turning it into a dinner disaster. The LDR laughed at my girlfriend's parents after they insisted Wi-Fi can run out and now they hate me. TIFU by being sleep deprived in Japan, leading to a broken femur, a broken clavicle, and a biblical series of unfortunate events trying to get home. Everything I'm about to write is true. For months, several people have told me I absolutely had to write the story down, so today, I finally decided to do it. Technically, this isn't a today I fucked up, it's more of a last October I fucked up, but I hope you'll forgive me. This might not be the perfect subreddit, but honestly, I had no idea where else to post a story this long and bizarre. I'll try to be as precise as possible with the context. Let's begin. After dreaming of visiting Japan for years, last year I finally bought the tickets, booked my vacation months in advance, and started planning the trip of a lifetime. I arrived in Milan the night before our departure, October 16th. To celebrate, I took 2 of my 3 friends. The third was at a concert at a Michelin-star Japanese restaurant. The idea was to see how the best Japanese food back home compared to the real deal. After dinner, we returned to an incredibly noisy B&B and barely slept a wink. The next morning, running on fumes, we got to the airport 4 hours early and calmly boarded flight CN150 from Milan to Beijing. The flight was uneventful. The layover in Beijing, however, was not. The atmosphere was incredibly tense. A Chinese security officer started screaming at me because he thought I had something suspicious in my pocket. It was a candy wrapper. After clearing security, we finally made it to our gate and boarded the next flight, CN125, to Tokyo. That flight was also smooth, and finally, after about 18 hours of travel, we landed at Narita Airport around 1:40 p.m. local time on October 18th. We made our way to our hotel in Shibuya to drop off our bags and take a shower. I was completely wiped out from the long journey and the lack of sleep. I suggested we meet up for dinner later to get a few hours of rest, but my friend protested. No, we're in Japan. Let's go for a walk right now. Fine. Apparently, I'm an old man on the inside. I agreed, and an hour later, I found myself wandering through Shibuya with nearly 36 hours of sleep debt weighing me down. We met up with a friend who had moved to Japan years ago. She acted as our guide, showing us around the area. We had dinner at a local spot where, as she put it, Gaijin don't usually go, and everything was absolutely incredible. After dinner, we decided to grab a drink. Our friend took us to a bar tucked away on a Shibuya side street packed with locals drinking and dancing. I had a couple of gin and tonics, which were mostly ice, and I danced enough that I felt pretty sober, but I was still seriously messed up from the exhaustion. At one point, I managed to de-escalate a fight between two huge Russian guys who were about to come to blows, and I even ended up making friends with them. I'm a 100 powerlifter, so I'm not a small guy. This detail will be relevant later. We left the bar, and since it was late around 1:30 a.m., our friend decided to take a taxi home. Our hotel was relatively close, so we planned to walk. As she was saying goodbye, I glanced up at the building across the street and saw a strange, ghostly figure staring at me from one of the upper floors. To this day, I'm not sure what it was. I assume it was just a creepy mannequin, but it was unsettling. I have photos if you want to see it. I turned to look at the street and saw a taxi stopped at the intersection on the other side. Our friend had mentioned that finding a taxi in that area that hour was tough, so we decided to make a dash for it. The street was deserted. The pedestrian light was still red, but it was on its last sliver. The traffic light for cars was already red. We looked left and right and, in true Beatles fashion, started crossing the street. My friend, who was right behind me, heard a strange noise. Neither I nor my other friend saw anything, but he screamed, "Watch out." Not knowing what was happening, I tried to sprint forward, as I was only about half a meter from the other side. I never made it. The world started spinning. In my head, I saw the city lights rotating as if I were inside a washing machine. The next thing I knew, I was lying on the ground. I had no idea what had happened, but I pushed myself up into a sitting position with my left arm. I felt no pain, no discomfort, just confusion. I saw pieces of a motorcycle's bodywork scattered around me. My friend rushed over to check on me. As I tried to make sense of it all, I realized that when I tried to move my left leg, only the top part of my femur moved. The rest of my leg stayed put. Broken leg? Yep. I started to feel a dull ache in the arm I was using to prop myself up. Something was probably broken there too. I switched to my other arm and looked at my left side. I didn't see anything unusual, but I felt a sharp pain around my collarbone. Broken clavicle? Yep. My hand was also bleeding heavily from a deep gash between my middle and ring fingers, likely from where I hit the motorcycle. That's right. I had been hit by a black motorcycle that, according to my friend and other bystanders, was traveling at around 70 km/h 45 mph at night with its headlights off. Or at least no one saw them, and they were off when the bike was on the ground. It's still unclear. I immediately asked how the rider was. At first, no one answered. A minute later, they told me he had been knocked unconscious by the impact but had come to almost immediately and was okay. His bike, an 800 Yamaha, was destroyed. A passerby called an ambulance, which arrived within minutes. The paramedics loaded me in. Thankfully, they understood some English, but my friend was able to translate in Japanese anyway what had happened and explain my condition. A police officer arrived shortly after, got into the ambulance, and asked me what happened. He asked if I had been drinking. I answered honestly, 1 beer, 2 gin and tonics. The officer stepped away and made a call. My friend overheard him tell the dispatcher a drunk agent caused an accident. He has insurance, he'll sort it out. My friends had to hold her back from screaming at him. No official report was filed. No statement was taken. When I got to the hospital, I realized the local police had simply made the problem disappear. The foreigner would deal with his insurance and the local rider would deal with his bike. At Shibuya Hospital, I was admitted to the emergency room. They ran full CT scans to assess the damage and stitched up my hand. The diagnosis? A compound fracture of the femur and a compound fracture of the clavicle. By now, it was the morning of October 19th. I sent 2 of my friends to continue their vacation while one stayed behind to help me, crashing at our local friend's place. The hospital scheduled my femur surgery for 2 days later, on Monday the 21st, and the clavicle surgery for the following week. The nurses were incredibly sweet and tried to communicate with me using some kind of Asian translation app, not Google Translate. This one had K-pop ads in the middle of the screen and translated everything horribly. One time, a nurse said something, and the app cut her off, translating it as "Kelly is drunk," which sent my friend and me into a fit of laughter. Another hilarious quirk was that Japanese often omits the subject of a sentence, so the app always defaulted to I. Phrases like "I have to take your pants off" became "I have to take my pants off," which, I admit, made me smile. I didn't realize it was that kind of hospital/JK. Monday arrived, and at 1:00 p.m., they wheeled me into the operating room. 9 hours of surgery. 4 bags of blood. A 30 titanium rod, 6 screws, and a metal clamp to put my femur back together. I came out of it at 10:00 p.m., completely zonked out from the anesthesia, but by the next day I was feeling generally okay. My foot, however, was paralyzed post-op apparently, and nerve was being compressed by swelling. Thankfully, it started to move again a couple of days later, which was a huge relief. The week after, the day before my clavicle surgery, they took me to the shower room to get washed. I could barely sit in a wheelchair, and my foot was screaming in pain strangely. My leg didn't hurt much, but the shooting pains in my foot felt like fiery needles. The nurse gestured for me to sit on a tiny stool that was probably the width of one of my thighs. I was barely perched on it. The room was just a hard floor with a bathtub in the middle. The nurse then motioned that she was going to remove the Roman 4 from my left arm. I pointed out that I had surgery the next day, but she insisted. She yanked it out. Just pulled it straight out, without applying pressure or even putting a cotton ball over it. Blood went everywhere. She panicked and just froze holding the needle, murmuring "oh oh," as a red pool formed on the floor. I looked at her, saw she was still holding the spongy elastic netting that had kept the Roman 4 in place, took it from her hand, and pressed down hard on the wound to stop the bleeding myself. It worked. She looked at me and said, "Oh, okay." I just stared back, saying nothing. To make matters worse, while moving me from the bed to the wheelchair earlier, one of the 2 pieces of my broken clavicle had popped out of place and was now visibly protruding, completely locking my left arm. A nurse proceeded to grab the shower head, rinse me, and apply soap to my arms and legs and shampoo to my head. Then she looked at me and said, "Okay." I motioned for the soap, and with my one good arm, I washed the rest of my body. When the shower was over, the nurse gestured for me to stand up and move to the wheelchair. I looked at the floor. It was stone, soaking wet and covered in soap. I had 1 functioning arm and 1 functioning leg. I weighed 100-220 pounds, and this Japanese nurse couldn't have weighed more than 40-90 pounds soaking wet. The stool was so low that I was past the deep squat position. I had 0 leverage. I motioned to her that to get me up, she'd need at least 3 more nurses. She grumbled, left, and came back with 4 more. The oldest nurse noticed a heavy, mobile metal platform at the end of the room. It had a handle at chest height. She wheeled it over and locked it in place to give me something to pull myself up with. With the help of 4 nurses, I started to stand. I was almost upright when I began to slip. My left leg, the one with the brand new titanium rod, slid out and slammed against the side of the bathtub as all 5 nurses now scrambled to keep me from falling. I looked at the nurse who had wanted me to get up by myself. I said nothing. She said nothing. We understood each other perfectly. The days passed. They operated on my clavicle, a 2-hour procedure, and life settled into a routine. The doctors wanted me to stay for 45 days before flying, but I insisted on going home and pushed myself as hard as I could in every physical therapy session. Finally, the surgeon who operated on me, one of the few people in the hospital who spoke excellent English, announced that I could fly home the following week. I had proven I could sit comfortably in a wheelchair and handle the return flight. I immediately looked for the first available flight, November 2nd. But then I had a hunch. I checked the weather forecast. A typhoon was coming. Typhoon Conway was set to pass directly over Tokyo on November 2nd. I decided to wait until November 4th. Risking a flight home during a typhoon seemed like a bad idea. Instead, I got to enjoy the storm from my 10th floor hospital window. Finally, November 4th arrived. I was discharged at 2:00 p.m. Outside the hospital, my friend met me with fresh sushi and a bottle of sake as a parting gift. The sushi was spectacular. At least I got to try some before leaving. A few hours later, we boarded flight TK 199 from Hindu to Istanbul, scheduled for 9:45 p.m. I was in business class since I needed to keep my legs straight. The plane took off, making a lot of noise, but it seemed normal. About 10 minutes after takeoff, I saw the pilot rush out of the cockpit and run towards the economy section. I started to worry. A few hours passed with no news. I even managed to fall asleep. At some point, I woke up and glanced at the flight map on the screen. The plane was heading back to Tokyo. I asked for an explanation, but the crew said nothing. Half an hour later, the pilot announced that there were technical problems and they didn't feel safe crossing the ocean with the engines in that condition. We would land back at Haenda, and if everything was okay, we'd take off again. Otherwise, the flight would be cancelled. We landed. A long time passed. Then the announcement came the engines were not in good condition. The flight was cancelled. We deplaned and went back to the airline ticket counter. They told us they would refund the tickets and we could book a flight with another airline. The refund, they said, would arrive within 2 weeks. We were talking about an 8,500 ticket. I dug in my heels and demanded they provide a hotel and a new flight home. This was their problem, not mine. After a 2-hour standoff, they finally found a solution, a new flight TK51 from Narita to Istanbul, departing November 6th at 10:15 a.m., followed by TK67 to Venice. They booked us a room at the Hilton Narita and the airport hotel in Istanbul. I finally got some real sleep at the Hilton. We took the new flight and landed in Istanbul where, during the approach, the wind was so strong that the plane had to line up with the runway at a sharp angle. As a result, the landing was very rough, the impact sent bottles and any other unsecured objects flying forward. Aside from a good scare, luckily we were all in one piece. Strangely, at the Turkish airport, no one spoke English. I pulled out my phone to use a translator and realized the airport's free Wi-Fi was limited to 30 minutes, which I had already used on the plane to text my parents. Airport staff wheeled me around without me having any idea where we were going. Then I remembered I had a company eSIM on my phone. I managed to get another 30 minutes of free internet, downloaded the Turkish language pack for Google Translate, and was finally able to talk to my escort. We were going to the hotel. After some complications at check-in, no one had realized I was in a wheelchair. They gave me a disabled access, fully automated smart room on the first floor. It was very comfortable. The bathroom had a shower with support bars and a chair anchored to the wall. Finally, I could take a real shower. I maneuvered myself onto the shower chair and turned on the hot water, planning to spend an hour just relaxing and washing the hospital smell off me. Half an hour went by. I was soapy, relaxed, and everything was fine. And then the entire room went pitch black. The hotel's smart home system, it turned out, had convenient motion sensors. If no motion was detected for 30 minutes, it would turn off all the lights to save energy. But there was no sensor in the bathroom. I sat there in the dark, naked, soapy, and with one working arm and leg under the hot water for like 5 long minutes. What were my options? Ring the emergency bell and have a random Turkish employee find me naked in the shower? Slowly lower myself to the floor and crawl to the door. Then, as I scratched my head, my left arm, I remembered I was wearing my smartwatch. I turned it on. The screen cast a faint glow. I used it to pull back the shower curtain, find my phone on the sink, and use its flashlight to get back into my wheelchair, roll to the entrance, and flip the main light switch back on. I finished my shower in 5 minutes and collapsed into bed. The next day, we finally took the flight home to TK67 and I made it back to Italy. I survived. And now I have one hell of a story to tell. Everything I've written is true, and I hope I've attached all the data that can prove it. I used Gemini to translate this text as I didn't feel like writing it all in English, but I have reviewed it and there are no major mistakes. However, if you find any strange AI-only special characters, you'll know why. If you want to see some pictures, just ask. I see that I cannot attach them here, but maybe I'm doing something wrong. TLDR, after 36 hours of no sleep, I jaywalked in Shibuya and got hit by a motorcycle going 7 with no lights on. I broke my femur and clavicle, endured a hospital stay full of comical errors, narrowly avoided a typhoon, survived a flight with engine failure, and nearly got trapped naked and disabled in a pitch-black smart hotel bathroom in Istanbul. But hey, I got to try some great sushi.